Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 21st of February, and this is Indexer Office Hours, Indexer Office Hours 95. This is the town square for indexers to come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexers in the graph ecosystem for anyone who is new to today's call. And we love participation. This is a conversation. So at certain parts in today's call, if you would like to get involved, please do unmute your mic so that you can contribute via voice or in the text box to the right. This is recorded and will be published onto public channels like YouTube. So if you're concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, I'm excited to get into today's agenda. Going to kick off today with opening remarks, where we had a GRT IQ episode with AJ Warner, and AJ Warner is the Chief Strategy Officer of Off-Chain Labs, which is the founding team behind Arbitrum, which is a layer 2 scaling solution for Ethereum. Arbitrum is, as many of you know, very widely received within the Ethereum community and has recently been added to MIPS. Indexers are trying to support it, so it's a very kind of topical conversation. Thank you, Chris, for posting the episode. This interview was interesting because AJ speaks a bit about his background in business law, real estate, and how he entered Web3. He also speaks a lot about L2s in general and what makes Arbitrum different. And so if you're interested in any of those topics as it relates to Arbitrum, L2s, the connection between the graph and Arbitrum, then I would highly recommend checking out that episode. It sounds like Chris enjoyed the episode. So yeah, please check out the link in the chat there. So if Anna's here, which I see she is, I would love to hand it to her to take us into our regularly scheduled Repo Watch.
Thank you, Abel, and hello, everyone. So today's Repo Watch is packed of updates, so we're going to have to move a bit faster. So please, if you've tried any of the releases that I'll be mentioning, either unmute yourself or message in the chat and let us know what your experience has been like. And with that, I'll just go straight to it. So we have had a new release of 𝗟𝗶H𝗀𝗀, that is version 2.39.0. And this release introduces a new way of making releases with binaries. It improves debug trace RPC methods. It fixes support for Go120, and it has some updates for Gnosis 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀, or 𝗨𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗀, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Then we have two new releases for Geth. So first release is a major release, number 1.11.0, otherwise known as 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃. I'm not sure where that sound was coming from. Sorry, I don't know if someone unmuted themselves. Okay, so get release 1.11. This replaces LevelDB with Pebble as a new database backend. And there's a lot of detail behind this decision in the release notes. It also prepares for path-based storage. It deprecates personal namespaces. So if you need to interact with personal APIs, you will need to specifically allow it via RPC-enabled deprecated personal command line flags. It adds a multiplexing tracer for each tracers and diff mode for pre-state tracers in each tracers. It improves EVM instance reusability. It has a better log sanitation, adds more packet information for P2P discovery, implements a resettable freezer for RawDB, and improves reading Go runtime metrics. So that's the first version for Geth. The second one is version 1.11.1, or Saradrill. this is just a patch release. So what everyone needs to know here is if you have not already upgraded to version 1.11.0, then you should make sure you read in detail all of the release notes before proceeding to update. But if you have upgraded to 1.11.0, there is no urgency to upgrade to 1.11.1 unless you are directly affected by the issues of 1.11.0, which have to do with 𝗨𝗨𝗂𝗧. Okay, with that in mind, next release would be 𝗨𝘀𝗧𝗧𝗧. So last week we went through all of the details of a 𝗨𝘀𝗧𝗧 version 1.17.0 unstable. Now this release has been marked as stable, so I won't go through the details again, but just know that now this release is safe to try. On the consensus layer client, we have had a new release for 𝗨𝘀𝗂𝗧, so that is 23.2.0. This fixes issues that was causing validators' keys to be loaded twice. An X matrix block timing tracking enabled options have been removed. It introduces doppelganger detection feature, introduces configuration overview printed during startup, removes references to beacon blocks methods such as it2, beacon chain, beacon blocks by root, and same finishing in beacon blocks by range. What you need to know about this release is that it is an optional, so 23.2.0 is an optional update, and it primarily updates dependent libraries, and it is only required for 𝗨𝗨𝗂𝗧 network nodes. So if you are not working with 𝗨𝗨𝗂 at all, don't worry about it. And on the graph stack, we have had a new release for graph node. This is release 0.30.0. It is a release candidate, so only try it on testnet. And here, what you need to know is that the new graph node installations now mandate Postgres SQL to use 𝗨local and UTF-8 encoding. The official Docker Compose YAML template has been updated accordingly. And then and/or filters, so and/or logical operations have been added, in which where filters, this is a much awaited feature. So if you're looking for and/or logical operators, they're here finally. IPFS file data sources have been added, and these allow subgraph developers to query off-chain information from IPFS directly into mappings. And there's a link to the GIP with more details in the agenda. Sorting by child entities, so nested sorting, has been added. So now you can order by properties of child entities. Support for Firehose-based block ingester has been added, and the indexers that use the new Firehose-based block ingester cannot automatically switch back to RPC. So this is important to remember. If you do need to downgrade, indexers will need to manually delete all blocks accumulated by Firehose in the database. So for this reason, you'll need to be very careful when switching over from RPC to Firehose. Forking options can now be set via environment variables, and they're more aggressive in memory caching of blocks close to the chain head, which should alleviate database load. More Prometheus metrics, and new Grafman stats subcommands such as set target and target to manage statistics targets for specific deployment. That's for all for graph node. Again, this is safe to test on testnet. Wait before upgrading to mainnet for this version. And then our last release for today. So for the indexer service and agent, we have had release number 0.20.12. Thank you, Hope, Ford, and Thiago for all of your work in this release. What you need to know is that on the indexer agent, allocation exchange contracts has been removed as an input. Network current epoch method has been also removed from critical path. There have been a bug fixed in the startup argument parser, and query fee metrics have been added for Prometheus. On the indexer common side, we have split checks and refine error messages when querying the EBO, and we have refactored epoch sync check when resolving current epoch block. Okay, this is all we have for this release. This has been marked as a stable release. Please let us know if anyone has tried it. And with that, I'm just checking. So no comments from anyone regarding these releases. So over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Anna. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, loud and
Cool. That silence was a little bit concerning though, but that's all fine. Cool. So getting into protocol watch, we have forum governance, a few topics to discuss. First of all, request for information about disputes GDR16. Influx added more context to the behavior of the indexer in question. Basically, it's a single dispute, but basically Influx claims there's like a whole lot of other potential disputes. So yeah, there's a little bit of discussion going on about those. Then we have JP43, which is the indexing rewards in L2, basically. There's more discussion about potentially delaying the indexing reward, basically turning on indexing rewards, and how this would impact the feasibility of indexer migration to L2. There's basically good arguments on both sides, so it's not like this is a taken decision, but it's something that's been discussed from the economics group. Yes, then we have JP39, which is curation B1.x. There's a little bit of a discussion about how the L2 migration would impact current curators, particularly those that are actually still curating and would be using the migration helpers, given that the L1 curves are actually bonding curves that have a reserve ratio that's not 1, and the L2 curves are actually, even though they're bonding curves, as far as I am aware, they are flattened bonding curves, so the migration would have to kind of like burn the shares and remint them on the other side, and that kind of like impacts the balance of the shares value and so on. So there's like a long discussion. But yeah, there are some potential different routes for creators to go with their business on L2. Then we have JP41, which is renaming as 42, as far as I'm aware, which is a world of data services. There has been a little bit of a discussion regarding differences in verifiability across different data services, as well as whether it's possible or not for the same data service to kind of like use different dispute algorithms or dispute methods, depending on the choice of the users. And by users, it could be the subgraph developers or any other indexer or whatever user is either consuming or even just sending those particular data services. This becomes a little bit weird to talk about because it's not subgraphs anymore, but yeah, that's basically the idea. Then we have JP46, which is the migration helpers. There are some discussions about some potential edge cases for both indexers and delegators using the migration helpers. This has to do with like all of the different cases where whether it's an indexer with liquid GRT, with a vesting contract that has not yet vested, a vesting contract that actually expired, but they have not made those funds liquid yet, so on and so forth. There are many different edge cases, and there's some potential for different migration helpers for each of those cases. Next, forum research. We have no new updates since last IOH. Getting into the contracts repository, we have a few work in progress PRs regarding most of the migration helpers, both for indexers, delegators, and as well as for subgraphs. Subgraphs, I think, also encompasses curators as kind of like the subgraph unit is basically the curation unit in a sense. But yeah, those are the actual PRs that are currently open for the contracts repository. Next up, we move into network subgraphs. There's a new release for the core network subgraph, which adds improvements to the bridge deposit and withdrawals so that it's a little bit more correct and can be seen both sides, I think. This has been worked by Tomas and it's B0.18. There's no need to update to that version because it only really adds some stuff that is useful for basically doing end-to-end testing and making sure that all of the withdrawals and bridge, everything's working correctly using the subgraph. But it has been released, and also it's been updated. The gateways have been updated to this version. I know there have been a few issues with the gateway subgraphs for the network, but they are supposed to be all fixed now that we released the latest version. But again, there's no need for indexers that are syncing their own subgraph to use this new released version because it doesn't add any features that indexers are going to be using. And that's pretty much it for Protocol Watch. So I'm going to hand it over to Abel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Juan, for Protocol Watch right there. Now we get into the main sections of today's conversation. And the first topic is just a reminder and a continuation of last week's topic, which was about the 𝗨𝗀𝗂𝗳𝗂 ceremony, and that you should keep this top of mind. If you haven't participated already, here is the link. Just keep in mind that sorry, did I say it incorrectly? KZG. My bad. Thank you so much, Alexi, for the correction there. So yeah, just to let you know, if you haven't participated already, there is a bit of a queue, but it's worth putting your name down and making sure that you're available to help, because not only are you supporting the security and scaling of Ethereum, but at some point we may leverage these kind of ceremonies in the Graph ecosystem as well, and it would be good practice to engage in it. Second of all, thank you, Chris. Yeah, there's a lot of people, as you can see, in the lobby there, but definitely worth putting your name down just in case you get to the end of that list there. Okay, next topic is all about a GIP, as Juan has mentioned earlier, the recently renamed GIP 42, which is a world of data services. And before I get into what it is and this whole discussion on the topic, I want to highlight why we're actually talking about this. So this is an important proposal, and it is going to have some changes. It's going to make some changes to the protocol, which is going to obviously have implications in the future. And I think it's important that everyone on this call, thank you, Chris, for linking to the proposal in the forum. It's important if you, whether you're an indexer or even a data consumer, to have your opinions and voices heard. You know, if you're an indexer, you know, let's not forget, all of us who are indexers are servicing data consumers. And if you're a data consumer, obviously this is going to be huge for you. So without further ado, let's get into this actual GIP. You can go ahead and read it in full, but I'll try my best to do a little bit of a breakdown before we get into today's conversation. So as we aim to expand the data services and APIs that we offer, subgraphs, and then soon to be substreams and many other types of data services, we want to be able to expand without making constant changes to the protocol. So this GIP tries to kind of like set forward a change that will make the protocol a lot more flexible. So in essence, this proposal suggesting abstracting away subgraphs in the protocol contracts and making them into a more general concept of data services that consist of more publishable data sets. The proposal aims to allow for more specialization and outsourcing of processing power and storage among indexers, and to maintain a more of a healthy and diverse indexer network. And just to highlight some of the three main changes in the proposal, the first one is to add a notion of data service types to the GNS contract. The second is to allow indexers to specify the data services, the data service type when creating an allocation in the staking contract. And then third and finally, expanding the verifiability router contracts to allow a different dispute mechanism for each supported data service type. So those are the main changes and proposals. Yanis was the publisher of this particular proposal, and I want to say that this conversation that we're going to have is more of a high level discussion. And Janice will hopefully join us next week to go into deeper detail as it relates to the proposal and his new thoughts in terms of this proposal here. But yeah, I want to turn it to Chris, who's going to speak to us a bit about how substreams came about and many other things, and how they relate to this particular proposal. So Chris, if you're available, please do take it away.
Thanks, Abel. Hey, everyone. Yeah, I thought it's a really interesting kind of it's a really interesting journey, or rather, the journey to substreams. I think is an interesting way to look at this GIP41 and the evolving data services needs out there. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that, when this technology and when the graph obviously kind of released its first iteration of the indexing stack, which was really subgraph centric, whether or not we kind of really looked at it this way or called it this, subgraphs are basically a monolithic ETLQ pipeline. And like, for anyone who hasn't heard this term ETL or ETLQ before, it's terminology that's common in kind of more traditional data science or data pipeline fields of work. And if we look at those letters, ETLQ, they stand for different things. So if we go through them, there's E, which is extraction. There's T, which is transformation. There's L, which is loading. And then there's Q, which is querying. And so if we think about a subgraph actually, or a subgraph plus graph node, actually does all of those things, right? For E, it extracting, it coordinates with the underlying blockchain node and makes RPC calls to pull the data out and extract the data. For T, or transformation, we have mappings, and those mappings run over that raw data and transform it into the schema that the subgraph has defined. For loading, graph node then takes that transformed data and stores it in Postgres. And finally, Q, obviously graph node, makes the subgraph API available, and somebody can query to pull data out of the subgraph. So there's this whole ETLQ pipeline that's like kind of wrapped up in what a subgraph is. And so that's how we started. And I think the major driver that led the Streaming Fast team to propose Firehose and substreams was really performance, right? Like this end-to-end ETLQ pipeline. On the one hand, is a really kind of convenient package and a great way for kind of extending the security guarantees that the protocol does all the way through those 4 steps, ETLQ. When we get to bigger, more complex data workloads, it makes sense to split up and kind of modularize and layer that stack. And so what the Streaming Fast team obviously did was propose Firehose and substreams. And if we kind of take a step back and look at the evolving subgraph stack, subgraphs powered by substreams no longer look like this monolithic ETLQ pipeline. And the kind of new version of that stack starts to look like extraction being provided by Firehose, transformation being provided by substreams, loading and querying then still being provided by GraphNode. And so that's kind of, what the next, evolution of this subgraph centric indexing stack looks like. But taking a big step back here, I think what has become very obvious is that in the same way that, there's this enormously diverse set of data needs out there, right, in the marketplace. There's a huge number of different people and companies and, groups that are trying to do different things with data. And the subgraph and the ETL-Q type pipeline works really well for a bunch of use cases, right? Particularly those that are very application centric, right? They power user interfaces and need a very short amount of pipeline latency. Subgraphs are great, and the evolution of the subgraph stack, where extraction and transformation is provided by Firehose and substreams respectively, is an enormous level up in that stack, but that end-to-end ETL-Q stack is still quite focused on the application use case. Now, there are a bunch of people out there that want to do other things, right? Maybe they're doing very large-scale data analysis and they want to run, billions of subgraph records through some kind of, massive pipeline or machine learning, or right, like these use cases call for consuming data in just quite a different way to an ETL-Q pipeline. And those people, right, and these are a lot of use cases that look like things like Nansen or Dune Analytics or Flipside, or there are a lot of there's a lot of kind of existing market share out there. They want to consume this data in a different way. And so they might actually want to consume that data kind of lower down in the stack than, GraphNode that might be, putting that data into the database and making it queryable. And so this GIP is kind of the path for us not just to level up subgraphs with this new modular stack, but to actually make the pieces, right, the modules of those stack. And today we're talking about Firehose and substreams very concretely as, their own first-class data services that you can consume through the graph network from a decentralized network of service providers, and ultimately have a similar set of security guarantees on the data that you get back than you do with subgraphs today. And so I think that's it. And as much as we're talking about Firehose and substreams right now, there are other things on the horizon. I'm sure many of you have heard the occasional mention of the EVM executor. But yeah, ultimately, this proposal lays the foundation for the graph to serve a much wider set of data use cases with a suite of products that each cater to their own set of the market.
So there you have
I
it.
hope that was useful. Back to you, Abel.
It certainly is, my friend. And for me, what you just said there illustrates why this is so important and why we've gone ahead and dedicated a specific episode of IOH to speak about this, right? Like, this is a very important change that's going to have profound implications going forward for the protocol. I want to turn it to Sam and also Matthew, who both have very good opinions on this particular topic, and then I want to open up to the larger community so that we can have a discussion, and then eventually kind of funnel all of these ideas and thoughts into the forum. I first want to turn it to Sam, who has a very interesting idea around giving consumers the ability to choose what kind of consensus and dispute mechanisms they require. So yeah, Sam, if you want to kind of elaborate more on what you wrote in the post with the wider community, I think that would be really, really helpful for all of us here. Oh, I can see that you've unmuted, but I can't seem to hear you. I can see that you're typing though. I'm assuming audio issues. Okay, not to worry. Maybe as a way of giving you some time to figure out those audio issues, I can turn it over to Matthew, who can perhaps maybe share some thoughts on this particular topic.
Hey, thanks, Abel, and thanks for the great description, Chris. I think that was excellent context for where we're going. I guess I'd like to talk about it from an indexer-centric point of view. If we look at the graph and we think about, we started with Ethereum, and then we're adding, Gnosis or Arbitrum or whatever. How many blockchain stacks are there out there? Well, I don't know. I can't count them. There's too many. And if the graph is going to be the universal indexing system, it's going to be really hard for a single indexer to manage all that blockchain data from all those different chains. And then, handle indexing all that data from all those different chains. And then, well, we got EVM executor, and then we've got, who knows what else is coming. So I think I like thinking about this GIP in the context of allowing indexers to specialize in things that they're good at, and then collaborate with others in the ecosystem to fill in the pieces that they don't have. So, for example, I might be a awesome indexer who really knows how to get the latest out of performance out of Postgres and serve queries really quickly. But I don't have the compute knowledge or background to run substreams. So maybe I can rely on other indexer to provide that. Or maybe I have lots of hardware to store, snapshots for downloading Arbitrum data, and I have lots of bandwidth. So I'll do that part, right? So if we look at the MIPS program, we can see there's many challenges that indexers run into. And this is not a challenge because it's the MIPS program. This is a challenge because we're dealing with big data in blockchain, and it's complicated. So I really like thinking about this GIP in that context of allowing indexers to specialize in the different parts of the stack that they're good at, and then they can collaborate with somebody else to provide a full picture. And I remember talking to 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗂𝗪 a while ago, and he was even thinking about like breaking substreams down further. Maybe some indexers are really good at processing certain kinds of substreams, or maybe they have a different CPU or disk capacity. So, one indexer might store a previously executed substream because they have cheap disk. Another one may have cheap CPU, so then they would rather recalculate it. But maybe they could, if they get a request, they could redirect it to one of the other indexers and have an efficient way of routing the queries through the ecosystem using, GraphCast or something where the indexers actually collaborate with each other to provide a great service. So I think there's a lot of interesting scope for discussion that comes out of enabling the network protocol to have these extra features. So I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. I'm just going to turn it over to Sam again, just to make sure that, or to ask again if audio is all good. Do you want to try again? Okay, I see he's unmuted, but typing, so I'm assuming he's still having audio issues. Okay, no worries. Yeah, maybe try hopping in and out. That might work. But in any case, I think let's turn it over to the community. We've obviously done a lot of context setting there, and I hope that was helpful. So now we enter into the conversational part of today's talk. So guys, fire away either in the chat or via voice. What are your thoughts, opinions on this particular GIP? As we've established, it's quite important. So yeah, would love to hear additional thoughts from various folks in today's call.
I just want to plus one what Matthew said. I think that's like a really exciting element to highlight, kind of enabling heterogeneity, like not just, in terms of providing different services, but kind of like allowing the service provider layer, like indexers, to specialize, and for indexers to kind of focus on different aspects of the overall suite is exciting, particularly because it allows indexers to consume services from one another. And I think that's just like a whole additional dimensionality to the market that just doesn't really exist today, where we more or less expect every single indexer to recreate the stack, or at least when indexers don't recreate the whole stack and do provision some managed or external service, that economic activity is like the protocol is not really viable for capturing that kind of thing today. Whereas I think, yeah, this proposal really moves us towards a place where yeah, indexers can get services from one another in a really seamless and efficient way.
I guess one of the questions is, say that there is several indexers involved in getting from bare blockchain to data to the consumer because they're all specializing in something, but the consumer is ending up with wrong data. Who is getting slashed?
That's obviously like quite a specific case, and I don't think that the none of the proposals are at a state where like the answer to that question is written down. My kind of, though, unsolicited opinion would be, that kind of each layer of the stack. So let's say that you have, indexer A that's running the fire hose and selling the fire hose stream to indexer B that's running the substreams, and then there's indexer C that is kind of serving queries. I think in some sense there should be no difference between the relationship that the end data consumer has with indexer C and the relationship that indexer A and indexer B have. Right? They're all just consumers, and each leg of consumption should come with its own security guarantees and its own, kind of I guess verifiability enforcement mechanism, whether that's like ZK or arbitration or whatever. So if the consumer gets a bad query, they kind of follow up with indexer C through whatever mechanism. And if it turns out that indexer C, produced bad data because they got bad data from indexer B, then that's a dispute process that they need to, file and follow through independently.
Hey everyone, can you hear me now?
Ah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Yes, nice.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's all good. Glad
Okay, so
glad we can hear you.
thank you. All right, so I'm really excited about this GIP. I think that's obvious with my Hitchhiker's reference. I think I know that Giannis, Zach, and Ariel are going to be coming out with something more specific with more details in the coming weeks. And what I'm about to talk about is it's really I think we need to deal there's going to be so many moving parts to GRP 42 that it's already going to be super complex, and what I'm about to talk about just adds to the complexity. But at least I think it's important to talk about it now, even if we don't get to it for a while. So one of the things that I've been thinking about for a while is writing to the chains that we operate on. This was an idea that was planted by both Brandon and Yaniv. They've been talking about this for several years, but I have some things I want to say about it. Okay, so I'm starting to think about the graph as a decentralized. I'm thinking of us as a decentralized node provider, and we already have our own consensus rules that we've added on top of operating this decentralized node. And we don't just do what a node provider does, because like Chris says, we also do this extract, transform, and load service. And during the transform step, we basically have Turing complete code that we can process the blockchain data with, and no providers can't do that, of course. So we already have a layer on top of this node providing service. And I'm just going to try to jump to the point, which is the ultimate, one of the things that I would like to see ultimately happen. If you think about all of our centralized competitors, they're also doing ETL. And so what is something that we can do that they can never do credibly? And that's put data back on chain. Because I say they can never do it because like would a Uniswap ever build on top of data that's provided by like Amazon, like a centralized source of data that can just shut them off? No. But if we can get data back on chain, then we do have a credible claim being unstoppable, our data being unstoppable. So that's ultimately what I would like to see happen. And how do we get there? How do we get there fast is what I would like to know or talk about now. Well, let's look at where are people paying for transactions today? It's DeFi. DeFi is not, of course, the ultimate use for crypto, in my opinion. For example, I thought Constitution DAO was amazing. That's one of the things I'm super excited to see crypto used for. But DeFi is where people are spending money today. So DeFi has a lot of value today. And so it might make sense, for example, to do a point solution for DeFi. Let's say in my response in the blog post, I talked about calculating the average ERC20 price of the ETH USDC ratio and getting that on chain. If we could do something like that in real time, then you could have other protocols build on top of it. For example, a lot of you could do stuff like options, and you could do AMMs that were based on price oracles. You could do a lot of stuff. Okay, so that's just one idea that I'm just going to use as a talking point. And if we could imagine if people were building DeFi on top of the data that we're putting on chain, then what that means is that the graph is providing security not just for queries, but for other applications that may be accruing their own value. And so this actually increases, increasing what I think might be called the capital efficiency, or the security that's being provided by the stake of our indexers. And so there's a lot of steps to, actually, let me just say one more thing. So the reason I think, I think that every application, even if nobody likes this idea of putting data on chain, I think we basically have two paths ahead of us from a R&D perspective. One is we try to come up with a generic solution. Yes, Anton, that's one thing that we could do. So there are two paths ahead of us. One, we can provide a generic solution for, let's say, each data source, a generic solution for verifiability. Or we can think of application, and that may be possible, but it could take a long time. But what if it's possible to come up with application-specific verifiability, or maybe I could say consensus, for each, like in my forum post, I said for each subgraph type, for each consumer demand. If we could do that, maybe we could get there faster, and we could have an impact in the whole Web3 space faster than a generic solution. And something that might enable that is I have this, it's a marketing term really, but I'm talking about programmable consensus. So imagine that other protocols could come in and they could say, okay, indexers, here is I have a new consensus mechanism for this application. If you would like to, participate in my application, then install this plugin or whatever in your indexer and run it alongside your existing stack. And this, if you run this, it means that you're going to agree to the consensus mechanism of this application that can put your capital at risk, your GRT at risk, if you violate the consensus mechanism. Okay, so there are other paths to get there. I've said a lot of stuff about a lot of different topics, and I need to organize my thoughts and get feedback from everybody. But I'm obviously excited about this topic, and I'm excited to hear everybody's thoughts and critiques. Thank you.
Amazing. I just want to direct your attention, Sam, to the comment section where Anton has made some additional comments in relation to what you just said there.
Yeah, and I can speak it in voice. Not
Amazing.
here. So basically, have you heard about first eigenlayer, or should I explain a bit what it is?
I know about eigenlayer, and I see what I'm talking about as the same argument, but I think it would be great to have an overview for everybody else.
So basically, eigenlayer is how they call it themselves, restaking committee. So their idea is to use the already staked Ethereum to restake it one more time with additional slashing that comes up to it, and restake it for different purposes. For example, for data availability committee, for bridging, for oracles, or whatever you want. You may choose several projects, you may choose one project. And the slashing proportion also would differ, and the APR for this staked Ethereum would differ also. So Mantle is a layer 2 made by Bit. So they use eigenlayer as a data availability committee in their, basically Mantle is a fork of Optimism with eigenlayer as a data availability committee. And yeah, the whole, so about staking. Mantle also use like double staking, this Ethereum staking and their Bit token staking. And so if we're talking about GRT and the graph and like the similarities between all this stuff, so maybe the graph, the GRT, can also be used in a similar fashion. And yeah, I think we can develop this idea from what they already have, and maybe we'll come up with something. But that's a general overview. And you can ask questions if you did not get something, or if you want me to talk about it a bit more.
Thanks for the overview, Anton. I'm familiar with restaking and like I personally I think that we shouldn't get too kind of like ultimately I think it's fair to assert that like at the very heart of what makes the decentralized network different is essentially like credible decentralized trust infrastructure. And so in a kind of exceptionally general framework, you could like see the kind of the most primitive value that you could generate as being the ability to generate credible security guarantees for really some arbitrary set of constraints. But I think at that point, like, your protocol is just so generalized that you're like that's what eigenlayer is, and I don't think that's what the graph should be. I think that there's quite a lot of value in like not being generalized, because you obviously trade away something for that generalization. Yeah, I don't know if that resonates with anyone else. One thing I did want to kind of add, and Sam, in his response to the GIP post on the forum, kind of talks about the this verifiability router, and how we kind of want to open up the scope to think more in terms of like consensus mechanisms. At least and I don't know if this is a bad understanding, but to me, like, something that jumped out at me about that was, in some sense, it almost adds this extra dimension to the market that didn't really exist before. And to be more specific about that, and I think you do touch on this in your post, Sam, but At the moment, the security guarantees offered by the protocol are singular, right? You query the protocol and you get a set of guarantees, and that's that. It's there's not a lot of optionality or choice. And I think the idea that you could potentially even register multiple instances of the same technical service, right? Like substreams A, B, C, right? They're all fundamentally substreams, but to have this kind of additional optionality with respect to the security mechanism backing the data that actually comes back, and ultimately the choice of taking on that cost or not. I think that's a whole extra dimension to the market that's quite exciting, and further opens up what's possible.
This is also amazing. I'm seeing so much chat in the chat, and also so much interesting discussion happening right now. I guess let's keep going. If any additional thoughts that folks have, we're coming up on the top of the hour, but just as a reminder for everyone, we do have an extra 30 minutes where we usually have the MIPS Q&A section, so we can always spill over into that if folks desire. So let's keep this going. Any additional thoughts? Okay, I see Ed Keck, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, joining now and trying to understand the context. Could this be used to bridge to other EVM chains? Just for reference, you said you've just joined the conversation and you're looking for additional context on what we've discussed. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Cool. Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
I would
Maybe
say
Chris?
in the most broad general terms, like yes. But I would be skeptical. I certainly wouldn't want that to be misconstrued as like the graph is becoming a bridge, and but ultimately, if we're talking about a future where this network of operators, currently we call them indexers, is kind of reading all of this data and transforming it and potentially putting some result of some computation back onto the chain, there's no reason that it would have to be on the same chain that the data came from. And so you could see the graph facilitating the movement of data between chains. But I want to stress, this is not like a roadmap item that I'm aware of.
Just to follow up here, he says, oops, sorry. I believe someone was trying to speak there. Not sure who that was.
Yeah, I wanted to ask whether that restake principle is being considered for this data services thing. Because as I understand that, as it was just explained, that basically the same collateral can serve multiple purposes. That means, I mean, the reason that I'm asking and the reason that I'm interested in is because it would mean that people or operators that are skilled but not necessarily have a whole lot of capital to buy a whole lot of collateral might be willing to take the risk of slashing from different angles and therefore operate more to their technical potential with lower capital investment.
I do think it's worth adding just one. Maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way, but I guess I would make a distinction here that restaking, right, i.e., like having some existing stake and restaking it to opt into additional slashing conditions and additional return, the kind of important part there is that the additional slashing conditions are conditions that do not exist in the original staked position, right? So in say eigenlayer, slashing conditions of the staked position are defined by the Ethereum 2 validator set rules, and then you're opting into additional conditions. And I would question whether that's the case here, right? Because each one of these data services that is registered with the protocol could come with its own set of enforceable slashing conditions. And so maybe it's just semantics here, but to me that's not restaking, right? Because you're not kind of adding additional slashing conditions that are extra protocol. You're just kind of in the first staking position. You're maybe allocating capital to a slightly different data service that comes with a different set of slashing conditions. But I don't think that's restaking.
Well, I think, in my opinion, it would be fair to say that you cannot suddenly use the same capital to allocate 10 times over to different subgraphs. What might be able as a possibility is that, okay, it's allocated to the subgraphs. That's where we are now, basically. But there is all these different sets of infrastructure that basically come below the or before that we get to the subgraph point, and it starts with the RPC that we could venture access to. It's the database. I saw talk about having direct SQL access. So there are different stages to different resources that could be used in a different way. Um, and that to me sounds a bit like that restake principle where we would potentially be able to opt in to extra risk and extra reward by unlocking sort of earlier stages of the infrastructure that we are running anyway. But again, yeah, I'm not an expert on risk.
Yeah, I can see what you're talking about, Cohen, and like that is an exciting idea, particularly if you could kind of do what you described. But I guess maybe like the biggest set of considerations here, like this whole question of like, can you effectively lever up on your stake? That to me, that is largely a separate question to the question of like data services and verifiability and slashing conditions and everything else. Like I do see the value in it, but obviously it's more of a evaluation that has to do with how that impacts the security guarantees offered by the protocol. Because ultimately, right, if you are like committing your capital to multiple sources, and you are you're liable to pay out on many of those sources, you could be in a condition where you can't actually like you essentially are insolvent. And so there are like real impacts to the security guarantees. But yeah, actually, now that I think about it, given that slashing amounts are limited to some absolute percentage of self stake, there's already a fair buffer that would allow kind of that capital efficiency.
So I agree that this topic is so GIP 42 may explode into a bunch of separate GIPs. But one of the things that I thought was important to talk about now, the reason I brought this up now, or I think it's relevant to bring up now, is this idea of flexibility in consensus. Because I think we're going to need it anyway, even as we start really digging into the details of getting, let's say, cryptographic verifiability from just subgraphs. Let's forget about firehose and substreams. Let's just or oracles or bringing off-chain data in. Just within subgraphs, it to do a general purpose verifiability, it versus looking at, let's just say, ERC20s, ERC721s. How I want to understand, and I'll be asking the cryptographers on my team to understand what are the trade-offs between a general approach, an application-specific approach. And, I'm also trying to sell this long-term vision of okay, what can the graph do that nobody else can do? And so I'm interested in both of these topics.
Amazing. Another question I guess I had, and also Chris mentioned this as well, is that you mentioned, Sam, I'm advocating adding extra conditions that are extra protocol. Could you please elaborate on that? I'm very curious as well.
Sure. So this is related to this application-specific idea. So let me talk through in more detail. Imagine that I'm interested in D5 for reasons I've already said. Imagine if I wanted a subgraph. This subgraph, what I wanted it to do was calculate the average ratio between two ERC20 tokens in all, let's say, Uniswap clones on Ethereum. So specifically, let's say for the ETH to USDC ratio. Why would I want to do that? Well, if you just look at, if you just take a price if you just calculate your price from a single pool, it's you're susceptible to manipulation. If you do any logic, smart contract logic on top of a price from a single pool, you're susceptible to pool manipulation. But if you want to build smart contract logic, let's say on the average token price across all liquidity sources in Ethereum, it is much more difficult to manipulate that token price. So this value actually has, this average price of this ratio actually has value. The problem is if you want to calculate this value directly from a smart contract by reading all of these pools, your smart contract, you can't do anything efficiently. If you just use Solidity and you simply read from all of the existing ERC20 pools where this all the token pairs where this exists across all dexes. So instead we have, somehow magically, let's say that we can calculate this fast enough, real time. This needs to be real time for this thought experiment. So someone imagine that we can index this stuff in real time, calculate this average value in real time. Okay, so now going back to this extra protocol stuff. So I have this average value that I would love to use on chain. I would love to use it to build DeFi applications. I would love to use it as an input for DeFi applications, for example, trigger liquidations on loans or other things. But I need to get it on chain within this block. So as soon as the last block is processed, I need the average updated, and I need to be able to consume it for decision making the next block. So could we use extra protocol consensus rules to get to this point quickly? How could this maybe happen? Imagine, I'm going to give a broken example, but maybe we could come up with something better with cryptography or some other mechanism. Imagine that I trusted a group of indexers within the graph, and I said, okay, I know you guys are all trustworthy, and all of you are welcome to join into my protocol. And what this means is that you would download, you may download an extra, like let's say a package, install a package along with the rest of your software, and what this thing could do, let's say it could use my protocol would then do the following. I have a smart contract, and what it will do is it will accept data if it's been signed by certain people. Who are these people? If it will accept data if it has a multi-sig from these whitelisted indexers, and then if it's been signed by these whitelist indexers, then this smart contract will accept it. So then what happens is when the average is updated, then these indexers that are whitelisted could then do a multi-sig on this data to say they've agreed on this data, and then return the data, which came actually the data was calculated. this would need to, like someone would make a query, say, hey, what's the average price? The indexers get the price, have the price, they sign it and send it back to the consumer. And then the consumer could submit it on chain and it has a signature, and the smart contract could be like, oh yeah, this data is signed. I'm going to use it for providing a loan or liquidating a loan or making an option, using it for options. And let's say that somehow magically, like one of the indexers messed up. So for example, if you look at Chainlink does some sort of average. They use statistics to calculate whether or not to accept the Oracle data. Similarly, with this protocol I'm proposing, if one of the indexers that are whitelisted, they mess up, then maybe the graph this would require a smart contract change, but they could say, oh, if someone messes up with saying that the data was right, then they get slashed, and it puts them, you know, it allows this protocol to trigger a slashing event on the indexer's data. So I know that what I just said is very strange in terms of like this multi-sig. Maybe it's like an N out of M approach where you do run a consensus similar to Chainlink before returning the data to the consumer. But something like that along those lines is what I'm thinking about.
That is super fascinating and kind of makes me think about what somebody said earlier about open versus closed systems. Like, I'm just thinking that like a lot of this stuff would be so much more difficult in a closed system or closed competitor versus the way that we're aspiring to build the graph, which is in a very much kind of open fashion. So yeah, I think open wins, and stuff like this can only be done in a very kind of in a much easier way when the system is open. So it's very interesting. A question I have is why would the protocol, well, this new protocol trigger a slashing event with the graph protocol? Like, what, like, can you go deeper into that? Like, I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I said a multi-sig, but that doesn't, I'm trying to use a very simple consensus mechanism for this example, but in general, we could survey all the consensus mechanisms used by validators across all of crypto, and all of those should be on the table for us. They could all be included as extra protocol, like consensus mechanisms that indexers would have to very carefully think about before, joining. They would have to be very carefully vetted. But let me go back to the Chainlink one. The Chainlink consensus, as I understand it, at a high level, basically, if you're a validator in Chainlink, what you do is you're going to be submitting a price or some piece of data for consideration to be included on chain as the Oracle update. Let's say it's just like the off-chain price of Bitcoin. If you as a validator, as a data submitter, submit a price that's, let's say, far away from the mean of everybody else, then you are going to be penalized. So similarly, so that's their consensus mechanism. These validators have agreed to be penalized if they submit a piece of data that is, an outlier from everybody else's. For my toy example, all of the indexers who agreed to submit a price, we could say they're going to submit it using, let's say, they could submit their price, and if the price that the indexer submits is out of bounds, they get slashed. That slashing is triggered by this logic that has somehow registered, somehow gotten approval, like maybe the indexer signs and says, okay, this protocol, if these guys decide to slash me, then, if the protocol decides to slash me, I'm getting slashed. Does that
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, like yeah, oh, this is so fascinating. I think there's so many directions that this could take, and I think your point earlier about how 𝗨𝗀𝗳𝗂 could be spun off into several other 𝗨𝗀s couldn't be closer to the truth, because yeah, there's just so many directions this could potentially be taken in. But yeah, I appreciate the breakdown there. That's, yeah, there's so much to think about here. And yeah, I think it's really fascinating about all the directions we could possibly go. By the way, I've been very much kind of listening to the conversation and not keeping track of what's being said in the chat, but I can see that many people have been asking questions and many people have been answering questions. Are there any questions that are still outstanding? Has someone asked the question and not been answered yet? And if so, could you maybe repost that question just so we can make sure that it's addressed before we wrap today's conversation? And then while people are doing that, I also want to make sure that all this amazing conversation that we're having is captured in the forum. So if off the back of this conversation, you've formulated new ideas, have new questions, et cetera, I would love for you to direct that to the forum. Just so Yanis, thank you, Chris, for sharing again. And just so Yanis and many others who unfortunately can't make it to today's call can keep track of the conversation, and so everyone who is interested in this can have one place where they can just keep track of the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and post this recording to the actual forum post, just so everything's all there as well. But yeah, please repost if you have any questions that are yet to be answered. I see 𝗨𝗚 is typing. Amazing. I'm glad to hear the positive sentiment there, 𝗨𝗚. Cool. Well, I'm going to do a final call for questions, thoughts, opinions, discussion. I feel like so far this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm certainly going to have to re-listen to the recording just to kind of get up to date, revisit the chat here, because there's been so much interesting conversation. But yeah, final call for questions. We're about 50 minutes over, about 50 minutes into our MIPS Q&A section, and I realize this has already been an hour and 15. So yeah, final call if anyone has any additional thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, I was thinking that, are we at this point talking mostly about live data or also about, let's say, blockchain snapshots, which might be trickier to verify because I guess every machine is gonna generate it on a different block and potentially even different pruning or whatever. Um, but looking at how much I'm doing on backups, yeah, that's a question that is sort of popping in my mind. Like, I have a lot of the Firehose backups, and I have different Aragon versions and different chain heights and stuff like that. So that's something I'm definitely wondering at. Storing half a petabyte of chain backups, basically.
That is a fantastic question, Cohen. Oh, Chris, sorry, are you gonna hop in on that?
No, I'm just gonna, express my support for exploring that kind of thing as well. I think that would be super useful for many people. I also wanted to, I guess, highlight one like interesting thing. I think mostly about this is definitely true of Firehose, but I think it's probably true of substreams as well. And that is like, if you query, like if you open a stream to the Firehose with no filters, right, and you are quite literally just, ingesting the Firehose, then you're pretty much just, reading literally, the person who's serving that Firehose stream to you, quite literally just reading the flat files and, sending the contents down the pipe your way. And that's pretty much, what, like if you wanted to get a snapshot or a backup or, a copy of that data, that's pretty much exactly what you would be doing anyway. So, um, for getting a copy of Firehose or substream data, it might just be as simple as requesting the entire stream without a filter. Yeah.
You'd still need a mind reader as well. I mean, depending on what you're looking for, you might the flat files are easy because they are deterministic, or at least they're supposed to be. It's the other stuff, and in Firehose there is still the mind reader part, and in most chains there's the live data, the live archive data, or the live full data, which might be a bit trickier to. I get I'm tricky mostly in the sense for verifiability.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Yay for more determinism inputs.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see, because from our team, we shared all the data to many people for Arbitrum on our FTP site. So is there going to be a whole bunch of people who generate the wrong subgraph because they all got it from the same place, which we didn't even produce, we just made it available. So these kind of data determinism questions are good. But at the same point, there's a need for it because the chains themselves don't seem to provide it, or not all of them.
Yeah, these questions, questions around snapshots, all of this is exactly the types of questions that I was hoping, or this kind of conversation was the type of conversation that I was hoping to have, and I'm glad that we're having it. All of these questions, thoughts, I would love for us to feed back into the forum post. That was the main objective, if I'm completely honest, with hosting a call like this, is that this, as we've established throughout this call, is such an important proposal for the graph ecosystem going forward, and ensuring that this very important constituent in the graph ecosystem, indexers, you guys have your say as it relates to this particular post is so important. So yeah, I just want to say that I'm absolutely loving all the discussion so far, and I'm glad that we're getting a ton of engagement on this, and lots of fantastic questions are being asked here as well. So with that, I'm going to do another call for questions, thoughts, opinions before we wrap today's call. Alrighty, well, I'm going to take that silence as confirmation that we've spoken a lot about this topic and gone quite deep. I just want to remind everyone that we're going to have another conversation on this topic next week. We're going to have hopefully Yanis. I will confirm with him if he's able to make it next week. Who's going to go deeper into this. He has, exactly, great context set for next week with Yanis. He's obviously created this proposal and has thought deeply about this. He's actually going to post some additional information on this in the coming days. So guys, I would love for you guys to keep your eyes on the post. And of course, as I've said multiple times throughout this call, would love for all of these questions, thoughts, ideas to be posted onto the forum. Like I said, I'm going to post this recording onto the forum there, just so everyone can have a visual and one place that they can go to as it relates to this particular topic. Everyone, it's been a pleasure having this discussion with you all. Thank you, every single one of you, for being here. I've certainly learned a lot, and I look forward to re-listening to the recording. And with that, I bid you all farewell and look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care, everyone.